Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to this March 30th day of March 2014 edition of Nightcast. The big news from this weekend, an earthquake with a magnitude of 5.1 shook part of Los Angeles.
It's the second earthquake in the area in 2 weeks, shaking a large part of Southern California. The quake centered on the suburb of La Habra, around 30 kilometers east of downtown Los Angeles. Its fire department rushed to the scene to check for any damage. Emergency services reported of gas and water leaks and power cuts to some areas. Public safety officials said crews were inspecting bridges, dams and rail tracks for any signs of damage.
We've had a very energetic aftershock sequence. There was a magnitude 3.6 foreshock about at 1 hour before the main shock. Since that time, we've had a number of aftershocks, up to about 20.
If you felt a long, slow roll, you're relatively far away from the event. We're having an aftershock now, about 2.7.
Eyewitnesses described how the walls were shaking, and all they could hear was the glass smashing around them.
I was ringing up a customer, and I think just suddenly we got a blackout, and the building is shaking like crazy, you know. So, and then I just screamed to everybody, just get out from the store, you know, because everything fell apart from the wall, you know. I can hear the noise.
The western U.S. state has long braced itself for a devastating quake. The San Andreas Fault on the edge of the Pacific Tectonic Plate runs directly through California. The latest quake was a reminder for those living in that part of the world for the need to be prepared. Nicola Carroll, BBC News.
And thank you, Nicola Carroll, for that report. We understand that the quake was felt as far east as Palm Springs and as far north up into Ventura County. Friends, this weekend, or actually today, in Turkey, there is a big election going on. Supporters and members of the media surrounded a polling station in Istanbul today as Prime Minister Erdogan cast his ballot in local elections seen as key to his future there. James Reynolds files this report from Istanbul.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan has just arrived at this polling station in a primary school. You might be able to make him out there. He's shaking hands to a line of dignitaries. And there's a huge scrum of people all around him here. This is his base of support. They're all chanting Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It's fascinating because he's not even on the ballot. But this election is essentially about him anyway. This is a referendum on his future. He now goes in the building to vote, waving at his supporters. This is the first time that the Turkish public has had to vote since last May and June's Gezi Park protests, since a recent corruption scandal involved some of Mr. Erdogan's own allies. And he may feel confident of victory. His supporters across the country have been very well organised. The one race which is important to watch is that right here in Istanbul for the mayor's office. The opposition Republican People's Party wants to win that back from Mr. Erdogan and his party. And the Prime Minister, who used to be the mayor of this city, has made it clear: whoever wins Istanbul wins Turkey.
And friends, related to Turkey, news from Thursday. Actually, no, this is a news report from Friday. Let's go to that next. Turkey has moved to block access to YouTube a day after a court ordered the suspension of a ban on Twitter, which Prime Minister Erdogan backed. The Telecoms Authority, TIB, said it had taken an administrative measure against the site, but another report suggests that talks are underway. Marika Oy has this report.
First, it was Twitter. Now it's YouTube. Turkey's government has been cracking down on social networking sites, which Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan accuses of spreading misinformation. What appears to have prompted the ban on YouTube is an audio recording between senior ministers which was posted on the site. They were allegedly discussing a possible military operation in Syria. Turkey's foreign minister said it constituted a declaration of war against his country.
I've been a Facebook and a YouTube user for years. I'm uneasy over these developments.
I wonder how far they will go to curb our freedom. First Twitter, now YouTube. What's next? Facebook? How far will they go, and when will this end?
Their approach is political, and they don't care what people think. This is an authoritarian ruling.
The Prime Minister faces important local elections this Sunday. He blames social networking sites for damaging his reputation, but his efforts to wipe out these sites don't appear to be working too well. Marie Coy, BBC News.
Thank you. And friends, tonight we have just one report on the daily episode regarding the missing flight MH370. Let me cue that story up. There. John Donison, reporting from Perth, has details on how the United States has sent over a ship with some special equipment that searches for the black box. John Donison has details on that for us.
The Ocean Shield will set sail on Monday. Its main mission will be trying to find the missing plane's black box flight recorder. Now, they've got a lot of sophisticated technology on the ship that's come over from the United States. They've got this bit of kit we've heard of before, the towed ping locator, which will be towed behind the ship to try and pick up signals, pings from the black box. They've also got a robotic sort of underwater submarine to try and track any of the wreckage and use sonar underwater. But the trouble is that this equipment is only really of any use when they have a pretty good idea of where the plane hit the water. And at the moment, they simply don't know. And what the team on board here are saying is that finding the black box, and remember now it's been more than 3 weeks since the plane crashed, is still a real long shot.
Okay, and the story continues to go on and on every day, and it may for a while longer. Friends, diplomatic efforts to resolve the situation in Ukraine continues today as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry meets the Russian foreign minister in Paris. This follows yesterday's festivities in the Crimean capital, Simferopol, when the clocks were moved forward 2 hours to align with Moscow time. Wendy Urquhart reports.
John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov have met several times over the last few weeks, and they'll be back at the table yet again later today, thanks to a phone call between Vladimir Putin and Barack Obama on Friday. The White House says the Russian president made the call. So does that mean that Moscow is ready to opt for a diplomatic solution? Tens of thousands of Russian troops have been deployed along the border in eastern Ukraine, and that's done little to reassure Kiev or the West about what Moscow will do next. Still, the Russian foreign minister insists that Russia has no intention of invading Ukraine.
We have absolutely no intention of or interest in crossing the Ukrainian border. Absolutely none.
Russia continues to strengthen its grip on Crimea. Ukrainian tanks have been loaded onto trains. They're being sent back to the mainland. After Russia's annexation of Crimea, they're not wanted, although some ships and Ukrainian military facilities have been taken over. On Saturday night, there were celebrations at the railway station in Simferopol. Waving flags and chanting, hundreds gathered to see the clock moved forward by 2 hours. Now they're officially on Moscow time. The Prime Minister of Crimea addressed the crowds. Dear friends, he said, congratulations about coming back home with a return to real time. This is our festivity. Kiev and the West have denounced the annexation as illegal, but the Russian ruble has already been introduced as the official currency of Crimea. The fear now is that Russia won't stop at Crimea. Sanctions introduced by the US and Europe have had little or no effect. Finding a way to bridge the gap between the two sides will be a struggle. Wendy Urquhart, BBC News.
Thank you, Wendy. Friends, Wendy mentioned the phone call between Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Barack Obama to discuss the U.S. proposal for a diplomatic solution to the crisis in Ukraine. And according to the White House, that telephone call was made on Friday.
It appears that President Putin rang President Obama, who's in Saudi Arabia at the moment, and according to the White House, he was seeking a diplomatic resolution to the Ukraine crisis. Now, the White House make President Obama sound very tough. They said that the Russian troops, he told them that the Russian troops have to withdraw from the eastern Ukraine border, and that there has to be proposals put by President Putin concretely in writing, and the two men agreed that their foreign ministers should meet. Now, I have to say the Kremlin readout is rather different. It has President Putin talking about people rampaging, extremists rampaging over the Ukraine, but he too is talking about a global resolution to the crisis, finding a solution. So it's pretty early days. As you say, the call has only just happened, but it does sound as though the Russians are backing away from further conflict and looking for a diplomatic solution.
Okay, thank you. And that, friends, was... Just a moment, I'll have his name for you. The BBC's Mark Mardell reporting. And we have the video of what Mark Mardell mentioned of U.S. President Barack Obama having urged Russia to move back its troops on Ukraine's border and lower tensions. Russia is believed to have massed a force of several thousand troops close to Ukraine's eastern frontier. Mr. Obama told CBS News, quote, because you are bigger and stronger, taking a piece of the country, that's not how international law and international norms are observed in the 21st century. Well, let's see. What do we do about going back to 1776? How the United States took its territory. Anyway, here's this news report on this one, friends.
On this, I think he's been willing to show a deeply held grievance about what he considers to be the loss of the Soviet Union. You would have thought that after a couple of decades that there'd be an awareness on the part of any Russian leader that the path forward is not to revert back to the kinds of practices that were so prevalent during the Cold War, but in fact to move forward with further integration with the world economy and to be a responsible international citizen. He's said that he considers the breakup of the Soviet Union to be tragic. I think there's a strong sense of Russian nationalism and a sense that somehow the West has taken advantage of Russia in the past, and that he wants to, in some fashion, reverse that or make up for that. What I have repeatedly said is that he may be entirely misreading the West. He's certainly misreading American foreign policy. We have no interest in encircling Russia, and we have no interest in Ukraine beyond letting the Ukrainian people make their own decisions about their own lives. And it is true that we reject the notion that there is a sphere of influence along the Russian border that then justifies Russia invading other countries. Certainly they're going to have influence because of trade and tradition and language and heritage with Ukraine. Everybody acknowledges that. But there's a difference between that and sending in troops because you're bigger and stronger, taking a piece of the country. That is not how international law and international norms are observed in the 21st century.
Friends, I have a piece of news from the BBC from March 21st. Now today is March 30, so that's just 9 days ago, that shows how Crimea is heavily dependent upon Ukraine for its water supply. But relations between Kiev and the freshly annexed region remain tense. Oleg Boldyrev reports from the Crimean Canal and asks what effect the diplomatic crisis will have on the region's lifeline.
Crimea is a very dry place. Surrounded from all sides by sea, it has very little fresh water. And so this is a lifeline. This is the North Crimean Canal, which brings the water from Ukraine, from the river Dnieper. According to some estimates, 85% of water in Crimea needs to be imported. The canal is almost empty now, but 2 days ago the gates at the reservoir 200 kilometers up north were opened, and so the water is expected to be here in 2 weeks' time. The canal was built 50 years ago. The infrastructure is pretty worn out. It loses half of the water it brings here. 2 weeks ago this would probably be just a pure economics, a budget issue, but now it's political. The water comes from Ukraine. Crimea is now controlled by Russia. Earlier on there were speculations, rumors, almost panic that the Ukrainians will shut down the canal supply. This was proven to be unfounded. But now Ukrainian authorities are saying they will raise the tariffs for the water for the Russian Crimea. They say they will somehow still subsidize the Ukrainians who live in Crimea, but just how this will work out we don't know. In the past there were plans to drill for water so Crimea wouldn't be so dependent on water imports. But this turned out to be too expensive for the Ukrainian state. Will Russia finance this? Russians are very keen to show economic advantages of Crimea now being Russian territory. All we know for sure that this is now pure water politics. Ukraine, Crimea, Russia, and this canal, which in 2 weeks' time will start flowing in full force. Oleg Boldyrev, BBC News, Crimea.
Friends, amazing how water can be the issue behind a lot of news stories, a lot of what happens in world events. Water. And there's one above who controls that water. That he can use that water to control agriculture, and agriculture is extremely important to a country's well-being and its lifeline. Food and famine, all those kind of things. Before we go to our last story for tonight, friends, let's just take one look at our chart from Revelation 6. I say Revelation 6 because there are 7 seals in the book of Revelation. Revelation 6 discusses 6 of those 7 seals. Jesus Christ described these seals and what they mean. He described them in plain language in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13. The 3 different writers of the Gospels all describing the same discourses that Jesus Christ gave regarding this. And I just wanted to put our slide up on the screen for a moment because of that story on the water. The water can lead to food shortages. That affects the 3rd seal, the black horse, which Jesus Christ described very simply in plain language as famine, food shortages. Now, in this last story, Russia's Sergei Lavrov vows no invasion into the Ukraine.
У нас нет никакого абсолютно намерения и интереса.
We have absolutely no intention of or interest in crossing Ukraine's borders. Absolutely. We only want for the work to be multilateral, so those riots that the West are trying to cover up, and present the situation in a good and serene way, so all this would stop.
The
President demanded from those who are in power in Ukraine now, and from their Western sponsors, to take immediate measures to halt the riots. He said that we will be protecting the rights of Russians and Russian speakers in Ukraine, using all political, diplomatic and legal means at our disposal. I don't have anything to add to this. We should work honestly here.
Friends, his comments came on Saturday in the wake of a discussion between the U.S. president and the Russian president as they spoke on Friday about a possible diplomatic solution to the crisis. Friends, that's it for our report for tonight, this Sunday night edition of Nightcast. God willing and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Monday night, with the current day's news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd, saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.